Welcome to your training. I'm Barbara Van Dynes, Membership Representative with YIPA. Your training is Youth Work Legislative Advocacy 101, and your trainer is Juliana Keene. I'll be turning it over to her in just a moment. First, I'd like to point out the Helpful Resources pod just below the title slide there. Juliana has provided these materials and resources for you. You can download those and save them if you like for later use. Understanding the legislative process is going to help you build your confidence in talking with your elected officials and community leaders about the critical nature of your work, the true needs of youth, and the concerns of your community. So we thank you for carving out time for this key role you play. Here at YIPA, you're the heart of a whole community of learners dedicated to helping young people achieve their personal potential. You do that through direct service to youth, and we do that through direct service to you in two ways: exceptional trainings and relentless advocacy. We provide exceptional trainings because we know, and research proves, when youth workers have access to quality professional development, the youth they serve do better. Every YIPA training is designed to help you build your knowledge, skills, and confidence in 8 essential youth work competencies. Today's competency focus area is the field of youth intervention. We have a youth intervention certification, or YIC for short, that covers all 8 of those focus areas in one complete online course that you can take on your own. You'll get a broad understanding and build a solid foundation for your great youth work. So we do invite you to please check that out at yipa.org. Our relentless advocacy really works to engage communities. We'd like to have everyone wholeheartedly support your work and become social activists to ensure that your programs get proper funding. So we're driving that movement with and for young people because we believe they deserve nothing less. So that's who we are. That's why we do what we do. YIPA works for you, and we like to say this is where you belong. We're going to take just a couple of seconds now to get ready to learn. Just take 5 seconds and set a good intention for your time here. Let go of all your previous distractions. Take a big breath in. Let it out. Relax and be ready to learn. Got it? All right. Let's turn your attention to learning about Youth Work Legislative Advocacy 101. It's all yours, Juliana.
Great. Thank you, Barbara, for the warm welcome and introduction. Welcome, everybody, to Youth Work Legislative Advocacy 101. As Barbara said, my name is Juliana Keene. I'm the Senior Director of Advocacy at Lutheran Social Service of Minnesota. I've been here for 6 legislative sessions, so I've been at LSS for 6 years. My background is as a social worker. I also have my degree in public policy, and it is a great honor and privilege to advocate with YIPA and with other folks at the Capitol on issues that we really care about. Like Barbara said, there's that chat pod down on the left of your screen. If you have any questions during the presentation, don't hesitate to type them in, and as I'm able, I will get to them. To start out today with our learning objective, today we are going to build skills and confidence to advocate on issues that impact one's life and community. We are going to gain knowledge of political representation at the state, local, state, and federal levels, understand how Minnesota's legislative session is designed as a 2-year cycle known as the biennium, and gain in-depth knowledge of the Minnesota legislative process regarding how an idea becomes a law. This is a lot of information for an hour, and I'm just going to start off by saying, even if all of the things around the legislative process and who represents you, seem overwhelming or complicated in any way, the most important thing that I want you to leave this training with is knowing that your voice and your story and your experiences really do matter and really do have an impact when you share them on the public policy process. I'd like to start out this morning, or today, with a poll, and that will be up on your screen in a moment here. Great. So if you can let us know, how comfortable currently do you feel advocating at the state level on issues that you care about. I'm going to give folks a couple seconds so we kind of get a feel of where folks are at. Great. So it looks like we have some people who feel pretty confident, some folks sort of in the middle, and some people who are a little bit uncomfortable. I want to assure you that wherever you are, if you are an experienced advocate or this is your first time thinking about advocating at the state level, that you should get something out of this presentation, either a reminder of something that is helpful that you already know or some new information about how to be an effective advocate. All right, we're going to move on now. Thank you. That was helpful. And start off with a quick conversation about what is advocacy. So I want to put that out to you as a group, to the participants, to in the chat there. Let me know, what do you think about what advocacy is? I see Rachel and Paul and a couple other folks who are typing. What does advocacy mean to you? Support, great. Standing up, Angela, thank you. Rachel says, standing up for people who cannot do it themselves. And I'll add with people who've had a hard time doing it themselves, advocating around services, trying to convince others to act in a certain way. Thank you, Paul. Resources, speaking out for underserved communities, voicing support for a case and urging others to do the same. Fantastic. You all have covered a lot of what I think about when I think about advocacy. So to start out with, so we're all on the same page as we think about what we're talking about today, a definition we use here at LSS is advocacy influences our public policy by providing a conduit for individuals and organizations to have a voice and an opinion. And I'm going to add that we don't do this in a neutral way. We are advocating, and our advocacy practice can focus on changing policy to bring more resources and opportunities to groups who have historically had less access to power and resources. So we're not doing this in a neutral way. We're doing this to change the way things work. So folks, there are a couple of people who felt more confident advocating, but for everyone, what are some different ways, especially when we think about public policy, what are different ways that we may be advocating? And you can, again, answer in the chat pod. I love hearing from folks. See a couple people typing. Great. Calling a legislator? Absolutely. Thank you, Paul. Rallying at the Capitol. YIPAs are some of my favorite rallies at the Capitol. Absolutely. Having protests. I'm going to wait for a couple more folks about different ways that you have advocated or that you could advocate. Meeting one-on-one with your representatives. Absolutely. That's a really important way. I'll wait for one more here. CY is typing. Submitting an intent in place on action with representatives when meeting with them. Yeah, so we're going to talk about asking our representatives to take action on things. Fantastic. Thank you so much for those of you who responded. So here is a list up on your screen of some different ways that we can advocate together on public policy. So the first way, really the building block of our democracy, is through voting and voter registration. We can, in the election process, participate in candidate forums and town hall forums, which is a really important way to communicate with our elected officials, phoning, emailing, meeting with elected officials, as some of you said, directly lobbying, encouraging others to act, educating elected officials, sharing our stories as well as data that we may have, testifying at hearings, advocating through social media. If you look at legislators who are having long meetings in committees or on the floor, you'll often see them scrolling through their social media just like we do. A great way to advocate on things. We can submit letters to the editor or op-eds, rallies, protests, phone banks, door knocking, running for office and encouraging others to run for office, boycotting, and many, many other ways. This is just not a comprehensive list. And how we decide to advocate depends really on what our strategy is. Depending on what our strategy is, we may choose different things that we want to do. For example, at LSS, it is really imperative that we maintain positive relationships with elected officials since we never know what issue we're going to need to be working with them on. And so primarily at LSS, we focus on things on the left side of the category of the slide here. Though we work with partners, and depending on what your strategy is, all of these can be really effective tools in our advocacy practice. There can be a lot of confusion about whether nonprofits and nonprofits, also known as 501c3s, can advocate, and I want to assure you that nonprofits can advocate. In fact, it's an important role of nonprofits, and educate our elected officials about the issues that we care about. The rule that you have to remember when you are advocating on behalf of your time working with a nonprofit is that we must remain nonpartisan 100% of the time during our time during our time with our nonprofit and using work resources. So this means never supporting or endorsing a candidate or party explicitly or implicitly in our advocacy efforts with our organization. I keep saying with our organization because on your personal time, if you want to door knock for a candidate or raise money or participate however you want to participate, that you certainly can do that. But during your time working for an organization, we just need to be very careful to remain nonpartisan. Organizations do have limits around how much we can lobby, but even organizations who spend a lot of their resources on lobbying tend to not come close to that limit. But if you do have questions about that, the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits is a great resource around nonprofits and advocacy. So hopefully you haven't been on your phone up till this point, but if you do have your phone nearby, we're going to talk a little bit now and make sure folks understand who represents you. So I have this website up, so you can either Google this, Google Who Represents Me, MN, or go to www.ledge.state.mn.us, and together we're going to look up who represents us at the legislature. There can also be, I find, a lot of confusion about who to talk to about what issue. So I'm going to give folks a minute to look that up if you have a phone or another computer with you. And if you have and have looked that up, in the chat box, let me know who your state senator is or your state representative, so I know folks are finding them. And this is for folks in Minnesota. If there are folks on this webinar who are not from Minnesota, you can Google Who Represents Me and put in where you live. Great. Paul lives in Senator Benson's district up in the Ham Lake area. Very powerful state senator, chair of our Health and Human Services Committee, and Representative Barr, I think a newer legislator on the representative side. Anyone else? Has anyone else successfully found their legislators? Give you another minute or two. Or if you're having a hard time, you can let me know as well. All right, I want to hear from Kristen here and Rachel. Great. Oh, we have Kristen with Senator Eakin out in the Moorhead area. One of our staff is meeting with him today. A very kind person. And Representative Runback, Rachel has Representative Runback. Fantastic. Great. So you can continue to do that and then put your phones down when you're done. And we're going to talk, this is what, if you're in Minnesota, it should look like when you bring up your elected officials. And we're going to start with the first person there on the slide, your state representative. So if we think about your state representative, they are the person who is closest to you. They represent 40,000 people in Minnesota. You know what? I'm going to take a step back for a second. And actually, I'm going to start with the bottom of the slide there and start with our U.S. senators. So in Minnesota and in every state in the country, there are 2 U.S. senators. And in Minnesota, our U.S. senators are Senator Tina Smith and Senator Amy Klobuchar. And we can think of our U.S. senators as the folks who go out to Washington, D.C. to represent us, working with the U.S. president and the senators from all of the other states. We also in the country will have 1 U.S. representative who goes out to D.C. and works with our U.S. senators and the president on setting federal policy that impacts the entire United States. Does anyone know how many U.S. representatives we have in Minnesota? Give folks a second to think about that. I think in the whole country there are 432 U.S. representatives, and they are determined by the census. So as you probably know, in 2020 we have a census every 10 years. We have a census coming up, yep. And depending on the population of each state, country, depending on the population of the country, we get divided up based on being counted in the census. And so it's really important that everyone gets counted in the census, because if we don't, there's a good chance we could lose one of our U.S. representative seats to a state with a growing population like Texas, which has 50 plus U.S. representatives, I think. And even if we don't, personally agree with every single thing that our U.S. representatives do, the more representation we have for our state, the better decisions that are going to be made for Minnesota. So in addition to our folks who go out in D.C., we also have folks who represented us here in Minnesota in St. Paul at our St. Paul Capitol. And so we have one person who represents every Minnesotan, every person who lives in Minnesota, and that is our Minnesota governor. Does anyone know who our Minnesota governor is? I see Jade and Siobhan are typing. Mark Dayton, very good. Mark Dayton was our governor until 2016, and now we have Tim Walz and Peggy Flanagan, our lieutenant governor, who represent all Minnesotans. That's okay. Sometimes I also think Dayton is still our governor. So if you are at the state capitol in St. Paul, you might see Governor Walz and Lieutenant Governor Flanagan there, working with our Minnesota legislators. In Minnesota, we have 67 state senators. So depending on where you live in one of 67 state Senate districts. So if you look on the slide here, this is somebody from Little Falls who looked up who represents them. And if you live in Little Falls, you are in Minnesota State Senate District 9. Then, if you further go in, and as a state senator, Senator Gazelka and all our 67 other senators represent about 80,000 people. Then, narrowing it further down, each state Senate district is divided into two, a 9A and a 9B. So the person in Little Falls, they live on the 9B side, which is represented by Ron Kresha. So it's kind of like the person on top is the person who's closest to you, and then the person on the bottom, our U.S. senators, are the people who are further away in D.C. So I'm going to go through this slide real quick. And then even at a closer level, we also have our county, city, municipal elected officials who represent us even at a closer level. But today, our time, we're focusing on the state level, because those are folks who are making really big decisions around youth work that we care about. And as YIPA, we have folks in every Minnesota district who can really have a big impact on our state policy. So sometimes when people think about their elected officials, they think of these all-knowing people who are experts in lots of different areas. I'm curious, has anyone ever met with their elected official? Anyone who's on the call ever met with their elected official? Yes. And Barbara, were they kind and respectful? What was your experience like? And Kristen is typing as well. Yes, just normal people, and Kristen adds very personable. So I want to talk a little bit about our Minnesota elected officials. In Minnesota, we have what's called a citizen legislature. That means that folks who run for office to serve at the state level, almost all of them have other jobs as well. They may be farmers or child care providers. They may be stay-at-home parents or have small businesses. We have a couple teachers. Right now we have 2 doctors at the legislature. Somebody may have run for office because they saw an issue in their community with speeding on the state highway in front of their house, and they decided they wanted to make a difference and make that a lower speed limit outside of their house. So they show up at the legislature when they're first elected, and they come in, it may be their first time ever in the Capitol. They are finding the bathrooms, figuring out where their desk is, and when they show up, they are then assigned to various committees, which we'll talk about in a little bit. They may be assigned to a committee like the Health and Human Service Committee, which deals with a lot of issues we really care about at LSS, or public safety, where a lot of YIPA legislation goes through. They're usually assigned to 3 or 4 different committees, and right away they are responsible for making really big decisions about things that deeply impact our work and impact the lives of young people who access our services and every aspect of our community. However, when elected officials show up to their jobs, it's very unlikely, unless they've had some very personal experience working with young people or as young people themselves, that they really understand in depth the work we do and the types of policies that are going to support young people in the way that we know will have a really positive impact. And so it is our responsibility as folks in the community who care about these issues, as members of our community, to show up and talk to our legislators about these topics that we care about the experiences that we're seeing in our communities. We can assume that if we're not showing up and sharing with elected officials about what we see in our communities, that they are not hearing about it. I'm just thinking about experiences. We at LSS do a lot of work with young people experiencing homelessness, and I can't tell you how many times we have talked to a legislator and they say, oh, that hasn't happened in my district. And we say, oh yeah, we work in your district, we see it all the time. Here are experiences of people in your community that you may not know about based on what your experience is. Claudia, great question. They are assigned committees by the leadership, so they don't get to choose what their committees are. Sometimes, maybe based on their background or preference, they'll get, like a doctor might be more likely to be assigned to Health and Human Services. But there are plenty of times where legislators have no idea why they were assigned to committee and have no background in that area, and explain it like drinking from a fire hose. Like they show up and all of a sudden there are these really complicated policies around Medicaid and Medicare and housing that they very quickly have to get up to speed on. And so they really rely actually on people like you and me and people who have experience in the community to help educate them on the issues that they are making decisions about. I'm also going to add that as people who work at nonprofits, we are really trusted resources on both sides of the aisle for elected officials. So in summary about our Minnesota legislators, like I said, we have a citizen legislature. So these are folks who are taking time off from their day jobs, which is a challenge to do during legislative session, sometimes traveling many, many hours from their home in other parts of the state and leaving their family to serve in our legislature. So my experience is that even when I don't personally agree with a legislator, that we have different viewpoints on issues, that pretty much everyone I have met there is there because they want to serve their community. It might be in a way different than I would serve my community, but in general, with few exceptions, my experience is people are there because they want to do good work. And at LSS, we really make sure we never write anyone off because we never know when somebody's going to have a change of experience. If they didn't agree with us in one area, maybe they'll agree with us in another area, or maybe they'll have a new experience in life that will change their minds about something. You should never feel like a burden for wanting to meet with your elected official and talk with your elected official. Their job is to represent you. They are there because they are making decisions on your behalf. And so you should never feel like any kind of burden in setting up time with your elected officials, especially at the state level. I have heard very few, if any, experiences of people who reached out to their elected officials who represented them and didn't get time with them. And in addition, they're personally motivated too because they want to be reelected. And to be reelected, they need to be meeting with folks from their communities so that they can get to know them. And I already talked about how as nonprofits we can be social service providers and other folks who are doing work in the community. We can really be somebody that they reach out to. Great, so we're going to talk briefly about the biennium cycle of the legislature. So the way I think about this is that when my organization sets our budget, we set our budget on a one-year cycle. So our LSS budget is October 1st to October 1st. That's not how it works at the state level. At the state level, they set a budget for 2 years. So we call that the biennium cycle. Also, you may notice that if you have ever been to the Capitol, sometime in the summer or in November or December, there's almost nobody there. Why is that? So we're going to walk through that process. So if you start at the top of the slide here, you can think about the November election. We had a whole new Minnesota House of Representatives elected, a new governor. Our state Senate pretty much stayed the same. So that was in 2018. In 2019, all those elected officials showed up at the legislature, and they had their first session of the biennium, which starts in January and is constitutionally, via the Minnesota Constitution, required to be done. I think it's the third Tuesday after the third Monday in May, some date like that, May 23rd. It's usually around there. And so when they're there in that odd year, because 2019, 19 is an odd number, their primary role is that they are setting a 2-year budget for the 2020-2021 biennium. So they have until May 23rd to hear all different types of ideas about how our about $45 billion state budget, or even decide how much that should be spent, how we should collect that in taxes, what policies we should make around that, etc. If they don't come to an agreement on a budget by that last day of the session, they will still be required to be done. They can be called back into a special session then. And if in this special session they don't complete their work by June 30th, which is the end of the fiscal year, that's when we would see a state government shut down at the state level if they do not come to some kind of budget agreement by then. So usually all goes well. They come to a budget agreement. That budget starts in the end of 2019, and that's still called the 2020-21 budget. And that June through December, they're back in their communities and their districts. It's a great time to have town hall forums. It's a great time to invite legislators out to your site. During legislative session, you may only be able to get like a 10 or 15 minute meeting with your legislator, but over the summer, it's more likely that they can meet you for coffee at a coffee shop in their district and have a lot more time to talk about issues. So then they come back. So this is where we are right now in the even year, 2020, which we often call the bonding year. And the bonding year, the legislative session, usually starts a little bit later. This year, I think it starts February 11th, 2020. And the reason it's called a bonding year is because they've already figured out the state budget for the next 2 years. And so this is when they tend to focus on bigger infrastructure projects called bonding, where the state borrows money to do things like build roads, bridges, convention centers. A bonding issue that LSS really cares about is around funding for affordable housing. And so oftentimes that is the bigger focus of the bonding year. Sometimes there is a state surplus where the state collected more in taxes than they spent, in which case there may be a supplemental budget, or sometimes the opposite happens and there's a deficit, so there may be cuts proposed. This is really also a good time in the 2020 in the even session to work on policy issues. For example, LSS will be working on a policy around foster care licensing because it doesn't have a big cost to it. Legislators are more likely to think about policy issues in that year. Then they'll again wrap up around May 23rd and they'll head back to their communities. And this will be a really big election year, hoping everyone's going to be very engaged in the election, a really good time to talk to your candidates about, get issues in front of them then, can be really effective. And so our entire state House of Representatives, our entire state Senate will all be up for, everyone except the governor will be up for election in 2020. So really important for us and for the young people to be engaged and have a voice in that process. As a reminder, if folks have questions, feel free to send them into the chat area as we move on to our next topic around legislative advocacy, which is how an idea becomes a law. And you'll see on this slide, I basically have a little map starting with an idea, tracking down through the authors and introduction, all the way to the governor's desk. So I call this How an Idea Becomes a Law in 9 easy steps. Not really easy, but if you say it's just 9 steps, it seems like it's easier. So to start out with an idea, who do you think can propose an idea for a law? So I'm going to type in the chat section. Who could propose an idea? A citizen, hopefully anyone. Yep. Great. I see a few other. Yes, you can. So anybody can have an idea for a law that should change. Does anyone, out of curiosity, off the top of their head, have an idea that they think should become a law in Minnesota? I don't see anyone typing. My son's idea is that 9-year-olds should be able to vote and wear pajamas every day, which I guess he could. I see one person typing. Great. So Jay's idea is that every young person has at least one mentor. Great idea. Okay, so let's take that as our idea and run it through how it would get turned into a law in Minnesota. And this is pretty similar to how it would be at the federal level as well. So as we talked about, anyone can suggest an idea for a law. It could be an individual, it could be a community or consumer group, it could be a legislator, it could be a government agency or professional association. Even the governor, if the governor has an idea, he or she has to go through the same process as everybody else to turn their idea into a law. So after you have your idea, the next thing that needs to happen is that it needs to be written up into legal form. So at the Minnesota legislature, we have the Office of the Reviser of Statutes, who can work to put the idea for the new law into proper legal form. And basically what you need to do this is to have elect some state representative or state senator who says, yeah, I think that's a good idea, and they send a note, or you can send a note CCing them, CCing your legislator so long as they're on board, to ask the Reviser of Statutes to put it into legal form. And Claudia, I will answer that question at the end. So this is the legal form of a bill that LSS worked on a few years ago around a program to help students or borrowers struggling with student loan debt. So that's the legal language. Everything that's underlined is new language in the statute. So the next step after you have the legal form is that you need to get authors for your bill. And so that could be the legislator who helps you get it in legal form, or it could be other folks. And so your authors, you need a chief author, a legislator, to sponsor the bill and introduce it. And you're going to need a chief author both on the Senate side and on the House side, right? So we have our 67 senators, or 60. So you need it to go through on the Senate side and then also on the House side. And once you get authors and the bill is introduced, it will get a House file and a Senate file number. So if you hear like HF 687, that's your House number, or an SF 232, that's your Senate number. In the House, you can have up to 34 co-authors on your bill, and on the Senate, you can have up to 5 total authors on your bill. And just if this is something that you're going to do and be engaged in, we really try at LSS at least, and I think at YIPA too, to have our bills be as bipartisan as possible, and we find it to be more effective that way. So then your bill will be introduced in the House and the Senate. So they're the same bill. There's a bill on the House side, a bill on the Senate side. They're called companion bills. And then the leadership of the House and the Senate will refer it to the appropriate committee or committees. So if it was a bill supporting YIPA, that often goes to the Public Safety Committee. LSS, a bill we work on a lot, is around the Homeless Youth Act. That goes to the Health and Human Services Committee. Some bills that have a lot of different topics in them, for example, a big opioid bill that passed this year might have to go through Health and Human Services, Judiciary Committee, Public Safety Committee, State Government Committee, depending on how many different areas it might impact. Great, so then it gets assigned to the committee. So the committee chair, who is always going to be a member of the majority party, so even if right now our Senate has a Republican majority and our House has a Democratic majority, and those committee chairs are assigned by the leadership, so that committee chair gets to choose what bills to hear. That committee chair may decide, I want to hear a lot of bills this session, I'm going to hear lots of different things, or they may decide, I'm just going to hear 5 or 10 bills this session. And so this is a time where you might be hearing from organizations like YIPA or other organizations that or associations that you're a part of, hear from them with action alerts to advocate to that committee chair or that committee to please hear this bill, that this is an important bill we want you to hear. And I'd say usually organizations like YIPA and LSS, we have good luck getting our bills heard because we have lots of relationships with our committee chairs and with committees, and we work hard to make sure that at least we can get a committee hearing. And I think of the committee hearing process a little bit like workshopping a bill. So the author of the bill comes to introduce the bill to that committee. And then this is a slide here with the author of our student loan bill all the way on the right, Representative Marion O'Neill. And then almost always, remember how I said it's rare that our elected officials are experts in a lot of different areas. Almost 100% of the time, an author will bring testifiers to come speak to that bill. So this is another time when it's a really good time to show up and advocate either in the audience to show support for that bill. We're not allowed to cheer or anything like that, but just your physical presence showing support for a bill, or you may be asked to testify on a bill and share a story about why this bill is important. So then the committee might amend the bill or have discussion on it. It could take 10 minutes. It could take many hours, depending on how complicated the bill is. And after discussion, the committee members can either approve or disapprove of the bill. And what most often happens is that the bill will be laid over for possible inclusion in an omnibus bill. An omnibus bill is a larger bill that includes lots of different topics in one issue area. For example, a large omnibus health and human services bill, or a K-12 bill, or a public safety bill. So it gets laid over for possible inclusion, and basically that means that at the end of all the bills being heard over a couple weeks, there's a deadline when they all have to be heard by, that the chair then gets to go back and decide which bills they want to include in their larger omnibus bill. The next thing that happens is the bill, maybe it's traveling by itself, maybe it's in an omnibus bill, gets sent to the full House and Senate floor. Let's assume it passed through. Everyone thought having a mentor for every young person is a great idea. It passes through the committee process, and then it goes, this is the Senate floor with a red carpet, and then it goes to the full Senate body and the full House body for a vote. What might have happened during that time is that the committees made some different changes to the bills, and so the bill in the House and the bill in the Senate are very different, perhaps, at this point. So then, to work out those differences, there is a conference committee appointed with 5 representatives from the representative side and 5 senators from the senator side who meet together to work out the differences in the bill and reach a compromise. Then, at the end, it goes back to the House floor and the Senate floor for them to give it an up or down vote. Let's say the bill got an up vote on both sides, and finally it goes to the governor's office for the governor to sign or to veto. And this is an important note. It's always important to connect with the governor's office. So you may get action alerts. I'm asking you to talk to the governor's office about why your idea is important. This could be either so the governor puts it in their proposal, or so when it comes to the end, they know why your bill is important and why they should sign that bill. And there are your 9 easy steps. Of course, there can be a lot of twists and turns, and sometimes it doesn't work exactly that way, but that's overall the way our ideas get put into law. And I want to say that in my 6 years at LSS, while there have been some frustrating things, I have seen a lot of really good ideas, like that idea around student loan counseling, funding for the Homeless Youth Act, this opioid bill. A lot of things actually do. I do this work because I'm really hopeful that we can, when we show up and have a voice, really good things happen. Great, so I know before I asked some folks had met with their elected officials, and I want to talk a little bit about how we can have successful meetings with our legislators. So this is a picture here with Representative Rena Moran, who represents Frogtown and Summit area of St. Paul, standing in the center there. And on her right is one of our youth workers at LSS, Rosie, and is on her left is a young person who accesses services at LSS, meeting with Representative Moran outside the House floor. Look how happy and confident they look. See, it's not too bad. So I'm going to break down having a successful meeting, again, into a couple pretty simple steps. As I mentioned before, during the legislative session, it's likely that you're only going to have a 10, 15-minute meeting with your elected official. If it's not during session, it might be longer. So the first thing you want to do when you meet with your elected official, even if you've met with them before, is to introduce yourself. If you're a constituent and live in their district, make sure they know that you're a constituent. They will always want to know that and ask where you live. If you're representing an organization, share what your organization does. The next thing, you're going to share why you're there. What issue concerns you? It's really helpful to share a personal story illustrating the issue. Sometimes when you share a really moving story or impactful story, you never know what's going to impact somebody, but you'll then hear that elected official sharing a story later with their committee or on the House or Senate floor. Of course, if you're sharing stories about young people that you work with, you're not going to want to use personal identifying information. And I also want to pause here as we talk about successful legislative meetings and talk about, especially when we're bringing young people to the Capitol with us, to really put a lot of thoughtfulness into making sure young people feel prepared and that they want to be there, that they want to share their story, that they know they don't have to share their story. We like to use a term at LSS called trauma-sensitive advocacy to make sure that our advocating and our meeting with legislators is something that's really empowering for both the staff and the young people we work with, instead of something that is triggering or something that feels tokenizing. And so I just encourage you, before you meet with elected officials, especially if you're bringing young people with you, but also for your own self, to think about what you need to do to prepare for this to be a positive experience. So a little side note there, you've shared your personal story illustrating the issue. This is when you want to make an ask for support. So you can ask, there's lots of different things you can ask for. You can ask for them to support your bill. You can ask for them to have further conversation. You can give them your cell phone number and tell them to please call you if there are issues that come up around the issue you care about. You can ask them to come out for a site visit. Those are all different things. And maybe you start with one ask, and if they say no, which is fine, no big deal if someone says no, you can move on to another ask. And then don't forget to wait for a response. Sometimes if we're nervous or, very Minnesotan or something, might have a hard time with the pause or the silence. So take a minute to pause and wait for them to respond, and maybe even be surprised. You be surprised of their positive, glowing response. And then ask or confirm what follow-up is needed. So if they say, oh, if I need time to think about this bill, say, well, would it be good for me to follow up in a week or 2 weeks? How should I follow up, et cetera? And then finally, thanking folks is a really important part of advocacy. Like I said, people may be far from their families, working until 3 in the morning, doing hard work, and always thanking folks is a good advocacy practice. So this may be awkward, but I'm going to try and do a little one-sided 2-minute or less meeting with a legislator. All right, so I would say, let's pretend I'm meeting with Representative Moran. Representative Moran, my name is Juliana. I live in your district at the corner of Blair and Victoria. I work at Lutheran Social Service. As you may know, LSF serves folks across the lifespan and living full and abundant lives in our community. I'm here because I want to talk to you about the Homeless Youth Act. As you may know, there are many young people who do not have access to safe or stable housing in our community. And I might share a little story. Would you please sign on to the bill supporting the Homeless Youth Act? Wait for a response. She'll say yes because she's a big champion. And then thanking her for her time. So there's my awkward little role play, one-sided. A couple of helpful hints. So especially during session, be prepared to be brief. Be prepared, and especially if you are with young people, that you might be meeting in a public location. So to be thoughtful about what feels appropriate or not appropriate, or comfortable or not comfortable for people to share. Taking photos is always a great idea. It's a good way to have follow-up after a meeting, to send a legislator a photo and another touch point with them. Plus, very often they'll, with your permission, will want to include that photo in their newsletter to show their constituents and folks what they're doing. See if you can find any mutual connections with legislators. That's helpful. You know, if you know anyone who knows them, just like when you maybe are meeting with a young person or trying to find things to connect about, find out, especially ahead of time, if you can do some research about what issues they care about, if this is an issue that they've really been a champion on in the past. The more you know, the more effective your meeting's going to be. If you don't know a lot too, that's okay. You can always ask them. And then remembering, you don't need to be an expert. If they ask you a question you don't know the answer to, it's a great opportunity to build trust and say, I don't know that, I'll get back to you, and a great opportunity to follow up. So never feel like you need to be an expert. And then if you do follow up, say you're going to follow up, of course, follow up. Hey, if anyone had any thoughts or questions and they wanted to include them in the chat box there on the left, feel free. So that was a lot of information about how a bill becomes a law, the biennium cycle, who represents you, and I just want to do a final plug here around 3 ways that you can make a difference if you are feeling overwhelmed by the political process or overwhelmed by life. So the first thing, if you are eligible to vote, that is the most basic building block of our advocacy. So making sure you are registered to vote, the folks that you work with who are eligible are also registered to vote and ready to vote. It's an important role of nonprofits, as well as encouraging participation in the census. As I mentioned before, political representation is determined by the census, as well as a lot of different funding decisions are determined by the census, and folks that we work with tend to be undercounted. So every 10 years we have the decennial census, and encouraging people to be involved, and you yourself making sure you fill out your census information is really important. The second thing is to join a coalition or be involved with a group like YIPA and to respond to their action alerts. So you may not be able to be at the Capitol every day, you actually likely can't, but that's why we have coalitions and organizations that are there and can tell us when it's really important to respond. And so I can assure you, folks at YIPA and folks like myself, we don't have time or interest in sending out action alerts just for the sake of sending out action alerts. We do it when we know that your response really will make a difference. So if you get an action alert, usually it just takes a minute or 2 to respond, and it could be about a committee hearing, it could be about a vote coming up, but do take a minute to respond. And the more that you can personalize those action alerts, the more impact they have. So if you can take a minute to change the subject heading if it's a form, or change a couple things to make it personal, we know that has a much bigger impact. If you don't have the time to do that, still respond to the action alert. Just know that the more personal you make it, the more likely they're going to respond. And then the third thing is to build relationships with your legislators. So hopefully you looked up who your elected officials are. In Minnesota, we're actually really lucky. Like I said, our state representatives represent about 40,000 people. In other states, state representatives may represent like 300,000 people. And so we actually have a pretty close level of elected official to us. And they want to hear from you. I can pretty much assure you, if you call and share a little bit about what even if you don't have a specific bill, share a little bit about what your work is, what your passion is. I think they would actually be moved to meet with you and hear and feel like it's a privilege to hear about your experiences or your stories and the stories of the young people that you work with. If you want to invite them out to a site, that's a great way to build a relationship, or invite them if you're having I think I saw someone there from high school, if your organization or school is having a party and you want to invite your elected officials. We just had a new building open in Moorhead, and like I said, Senator Eakin is there today, and Representative Lean. They likely will show up. It's a great opportunity for them. So I'm going to return back to our learning objectives here. So building skills and confidence to advocate on issue that impacts one's life and community. So knowing who your elected official is, knowing how to have an effective meeting, gaining knowledge of political representation at the local, state, and federal levels. So we did talk about how you have your state representative, your state senator, your U.S. representative, your U.S. senator, our governor at the state level, and then of course the president. And thinking about what issue you need to talk to about who. And if you're not sure, you can ask folks like your team at YIPA, and they can help direct you to the right person to talk to. The next point, understand how Minnesota's legislative session is designed as a 2-year cycle known as the biennium, and we went through that slide. So what might be happening at different times of the year. And then gain knowledge of the Minnesota legislative process regarding how an idea becomes a law. Those 9, sometimes simple, sometimes not so simple steps. These helpful resources are also listed at the bottom of your screen. And I can't emphasize enough the Minnesota Legislative website. That second website is a wealth of information. So you can look up what bills have been introduced. You can click so that you can follow a bill through the process and get alerts when it's going to be heard in a committee. You can also sign up for a committee's email alerts. So if you're following issues that are heard in Health and Human Services or public safety, you can get emails with that committee's agenda, etc. Also, if you need to look up information about your legislature, what bills they've supported, etc. Highly recommend that. The other one I'm going to highly recommend is that first one, mnvotes.org. If you're in Minnesota, you can find everything you need there about voter eligibility. If you are registered to vote, you can register to vote online. You can request an absentee ballot, etc. So all of those are great resources, but I especially wanted to highlight those top 2. This is our my contact information. There was a question about sharing the slides.
Wow,
These slides are actually part of a full-day advocacy boot camp that LSF does, a full-day immersion experience at the Capitol. And so we do share these slides with folks who come through the full advocacy boot camp because it has a greater context around them. And if you want more information about that, you can contact advocacy at lsfmn.org. I'll stay on after Barbara is done if there are additional questions. But at this